All right, everybody. Thanks so much for stopping by another live episode of Real Estate Titans. I'm your host, Greg Fowler, traveling throughout the marketplace, interviewing the top real estate professionals in our field, essentially gathering insight, inspiration, really drives and motivates these top producers above and beyond everybody else in what I'd like to consider a real estate titan. Our very special guest and feature titan for today, Matt Leigh. Matt, I'm so excited, absolutely honored to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited too.
Yeah, this is great. And just so everybody else, if you didn't see the pre-announcement, so we're both here in Colorado. We were supposed to get together face-to-face in your beautiful office downtown in Denver. The weather and Mother Nature was not having that today, so we are doing this via Zoom. But, bringing the content, the show must go on. So, Matt, again, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Yep, absolutely, man. The power of technology, but also the power of Mother Nature. So Mother Nature won.
That's right. 1 point Mother Nature. So let's just go into, I really just want to really share your story, tools, tactics, thought processes from you, such a thought leader and industry, maverick, if you will, really growing and scaling business in the real estate world. So I just want to dive into the series of questions, Matt, if you're all right with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever you want to talk about.
Cool. So first things first, let's just tell everybody, I guess, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I grew up here in Colorado, down in Colorado Springs, and grew up around the real estate industry. My family and extended family have a commercial real estate brokerage firm down there, and went to college in Fort Collins where I met my wife, and we live in Arvada. Actually went to college to be an architect because I wanted to design and build golf courses. But when I graduated college in 2008, nobody was really designing and building golf courses as the economy was kind of going the opposite direction.
Wow.
Yeah, so was an architect for about 1.5 years and just didn't really like working for somebody else. And funny story about that was I had gotten, it was literally like out of a movie where we walked into we had like one of these big brand new, open area office spaces in downtown Denver, and phones started ringing at people's desks, and they would get called into a conference room. And then while they were gone, the IT guy would come take their computer away, and then they would come out, like sometimes crying, like 10 minutes later. And then they would basically have a box. They'd pack up all their stuff and they'd get escorted out of the building. And like starting at like 1:00 in the afternoon, this just started happening for an office of like 150 people. And finally, my phone rings at my desk, and it's the president of the company. And he's like, "Hey, Patrick or Matt, this is Patrick." And I was like, "Is it my turn now?" It totally caught him off guard, and I could tell he was trying to be like, keep the HR politically correct. He's like, "Could you please come to the conference room, and we have to have a meeting with you." And I was like, "All right." So I go down there, I get laid off,
Wow.
and so then after about 2 weeks, I get a phone call from my boss at that office, and he goes, "Hey, we've laid off everybody that knows how to use a computer. And would you mind coming back? Because we just won this new project at the University of Colorado, and we need someone to do the architectural CAD for it." And, I was newly married, had my first house that we had bought our first brand new car ever in our lives.
Wow.
And I'm like, well, I don't really want to do this anymore, but I need an income. So I went back, and I showed up there on Monday, and they meet me at the front, and they go, "Well, actually, we've laid off the receptionist. So we're going to have you do architecture work, but would you mind sitting at the front desk and manning the reception table too?" And of course I'm not, and I'm not above anything. Like it didn't, I don't mind being a receptionist, but it was just, the whole thing was just so like, this is awesome.
Right.
I really see how the value you see in me. So after about a week, it turned into, "Matt, this is how you make the coffee, and this is where you go get the mail. And by the way, how's that architecture project coming?" So I did that for like another 4 months, but I realized at that point that I learned 2 valuable lessons. One was never settle for what you really want to do in your life. And the second thing is, for me personally, I didn't want my family's financial income to be dependent upon somebody else's business decisions.
Wow.
And the main reason that they were laying everybody off is because they had grown too quickly for the amount of revenue they had coming in.
Okay.
And so the architecture industry specifically is very, very heavily dependent on the economy. So when the economy took a skid, that's like a leading indicator, because it dies off before construction dies off, because you can't build something before you design it, right? So I mean, before the construction industry had really slowed to a halt, the architecture design industry slowed to a halt like 24 months before that, because that's how long it takes to get something built. And they didn't see the writing on the wall, so they went out and built this new multi-million-dollar building right in downtown Denver, and that's what basically made them, have to lay everybody off because they couldn't afford
Wow.
the overhead. And so I reached out to Keller Williams just on a Craigslist ad and went and met with them, and they're like, "Yeah, this is how real estate works, and you can make this amount of money and do all these things." And I'm like, "Cool, like, what do you pay me?" And they're like, "Nothing."
Yeah, there's the catch.
And I go, "Oh, well, then I'm going to go back and be an architect and really, try to figure this out." So, but it took about 4 more months before I really kind of had gotten my wife on board and really done some more research about like what the potential income could be, what the work was, to the extent that I understood it at that point. And then I got my license in 28 days, just would go home and study and cram after work. In August of 2009, became licensed joined Keller Williams in Golden, and didn't sell anything until February of 2010. And then in 2010, I was the Rookie of the Year for Keller Williams in Colorado.
Wow.
And sold 26 houses, and then never really looked back. And I sold real estate full time through about the beginning of 2014, and then got the opportunity. And I was closing about 50 to 60 deals a year, working on, as a part of this team, real estate team there, with a guy who was a really influential mentor for me when I first got in the business. And it got to the point where I kind of outgrown that opportunity. And also at that point in my career, kind of had gotten to a point where I sort of felt like I had the understanding of what real estate sales was. And I was kind of looking to take my career further, but not necessarily at that point go build a massive mega real estate team. And so got the opportunity to get into running Keller Williams Market Center here in Littleton, and got into franchise ownership, and then ran the office here in Littleton as a team leader for about 3.5 years. And then in, would have been July of 2016, got the opportunity to, July of 2017, got the opportunity to launch a Keller Williams franchise back in Colorado Springs, which I always wanted to bring another KW office to the Springs, because at the time, there was 2 very successful offices in town that had been there forever, kind of icons in the industry down there as far as brokerage firms go, and they're very successful. And so I kind of wanted to, but I felt like there was also a lot of untapped opportunity there.
Agreed.
And so was given the opportunity to take that and run with it, and opened up 4 months later, and we've been just celebrated our 2nd year anniversary down in the Springs as a brokerage firm. And in October of this year, so last month, we were the 3rd highest grossing brokerage firm in sales volume in the market. So yeah, so that office has grown really well with some really successful people, and the office in Littleton here is doing really well as well. So so stepping down from the team leader role about a year and a half ago now, I kind of have relaunched my sales business. So, so 2020 is going to be a kind of a year to focus more on that as well. So
I love it. And Matt, that's a beautiful track as far as letting everybody know kind of where you come from. What was the thought process as you were going through and growing in your career? Obviously making the huge impact that you've made thus far and continue to make in the industry, not just in Colorado, but, across the board. So I do want to chat just a little bit about Keller Williams and opportunities that way before we dive a little bit deeper into you. You have an amazing video that's out there, that really kind of explains the ins and outs of really what Keller Williams has to offer. And I think you just explain it so simplistically, but then also really diving deep, if that makes sense. So would you mind talking a little bit about that opportunity in Denver, Springs, Littleton, that sort of thing, but also KW?
Yeah. So, you can go to YouTube and just find my name on there, and you can find the video. And basically the reason that I created that opportunity video is that, to me, that is the differentiating factor between our brokerage firm and the opportunities that we provide versus every other model that's out there. Because every other real estate company, the value proposition is what portion of the commission do you keep versus what portion of the commission do I keep as a real estate agent, and what ancillary services and support and some level of technology do you provide to me as an agent. But at the end of the day, our value is helping you on some level continue to be a real estate agent. And there's nothing wrong with being a real estate agent in and of itself. If that's all you want to do, then go be the best one you can be. Keller Williams, though, for those that are looking for opportunities to build a career within the real estate space, that's what that video talks about is the various opportunities of, and they're all revenue streams, whether you get paid coaching, training as an investor or owner of Keller Williams franchises, building a real estate team, expanding your real estate business via our expansion model to different markets, getting involved in the corporate side of Keller Williams, working down in Austin, Texas on the various different divisions of Keller Williams there, or there's so many different things. And obviously the leadership positions within a particular market center as well. So that's been what has kept me at this company above and beyond just the value of that it provides to a real estate agent, is the ability to continue to expand my career in the real estate space without only having to rely on real estate sales as my only income stream.
I think that's beautiful. And again, you dive deep into that and breaking that whole thing down. So I'll save everybody the trouble of YouTubing it. I'm going to have it in the comments down below. I'll have a link so you can watch that immediately. But obviously, you can always reach out to Matt directly. Hopefully, I'm not throwing you under the bus there, Matt. But any questions, any thought process to growing and scaling your business, but then for Keller Williams and opportunities there, please reach out to Matt. I'll have all of his contact information as well down there too. But Matt, I do want to shift gears on this. And I think that diving deeper into who you are as a person, a professional, is really important for everybody out there, really just to understand you a little better. So the next question ends up being, what's your why? What really drives you, motivates you, gets you excited every day out of bed to do what you do to the level that you do it at?
Yeah. And for me, that has changed over time. And I've always, I've been in numerous courses and classes where they talk about, what is your why? And for me, everything that I've ever thought that it was always has another level above that, which is what I think it really is. And ultimately, and what I've come to realize is my ultimate why is freedom.
Wow.
And what I mean by that is I want the freedom, both with my time and financially, to say yes to opportunities and things that I find enjoyment in. So if you call me up and say, hey, Matt, I've got this new business opportunity, and to be an investor in it, I need X amount of dollars, is something you would ever consider. And I want the freedom to be able to not have the money be a barrier of my ability to take advantage of opportunities. I want time to not be a barrier. I want to be able to say, yes, I would like to do that because I have the time to do that, because there's balance in my life and there's margin in my life. I want the freedom to say no to things. Hey, Matt, I really need you to do this. I don't want to. Or more importantly, like, hey, listen, I've got my son's soccer game tonight at 6, and that's what takes precedent. You don't own my time, and I want the freedom to be completely present. And I want the freedom to be completely unplugged.
Wow.
And so everything I'm like, yeah, my big why is family. Well, it is, but that's really, I want the freedom to be able to be present with my family.
Right.
I want the freedom to financially be able to provide for my family and those that I care about, and organizations and charities that I care about and missions that I care about. And so that to me, like, is what it is. And what drives me in that is money. Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich says that money is good for the good that it could do. And it really just exacerbates the person you already are. Mm-hmm. So if you're a jerk, money makes you a bigger jerk.
Agreed.
And if you're a benevolent individual, money gives you the ability to have a serious amount of impact, right? Mm-hmm. Like Bill Gates and the wealth that he's created has been able to eradicate smallpox from the planet of Earth for the first time in human history, right? Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? That actually takes a lot of money to do that.
Right.
You can't wish that into existence. You actually have to pay for research and advancements in food and public health and things like that to get those things to go away. And so that's where, when I think about working hard, it's in wanting to be successful, it's because of the byproduct of what that wealth can do for me and the people and things I care about,
But to me, Matt, that makes perfect sense. And starting from the very beginning, which is freedom, right? And so many facets that you've broken down through that freedom, I think is a beautiful representation of yourself and why you do what you do for all the people that are around you. I think that's one of the best whys that I've heard in a while when it comes down to it, that freedom portion. And, when you're talking about Bill Gates and different entrepreneurs and multimillionaires and billionaires that are out there, and there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of good, the more you make, the more you can give. And,
Yep.
and I like that mentality. And it's not about the money, but the money is the byproduct of doing what you do, how you do it, consistently to that highest level. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I've never wanted to apologize for wanting to be successful. I
Right.
don't subscribe to the idea that, you should just be okay with being okay. And that's works for some people. And I also think some people use it as a, sort of a justification for just existing, right? Or
Right.
whatever.
Mediocrity.
And yeah.
Mhm.
And so they rationalize it that way. Well, I don't deserve this, or who am I to want whatever, right?
Sure.
And so most of the really, really, really wealthy people that I know and interact with are actually really good human beings that make a lot of impact in the world. And a lot
Right.
of them do it for the most part in a way that nobody would ever know,
Mhm.
And so I think the problem is, like anything, it's the extremes that get noticed, right?
Right.
You notice Mother Teresa, but you also notice the person driving around in their bright yellow, sports car, flashing the fact that they make a lot of money. And people are
Sure.
like, well, if that's what it looks like when you're rich, I don't want to be that kind of person.
Right.
Or if that's what I have to give up to be not, or to give away, then I don't want to do that either. Most people exist in the middle. And so
Mm.
I think, that's really what it is about for me is wanting, my dad always told me, and this is like one of the things he's always has stuck with me, is you have to work hard for a certain period of time in your life so that you don't have to work hard your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think
Well
that's
said.
especially, I'm 35 and, I'm like kind of on the tail end of the millennial generation. And I have a lot of friends and people that are younger than me. And I think that's the biggest struggle that people from, probably, 15 years old to 35 years old in our country face right now is an entitlement issue.
Right.
It's not, for most people in the Western world, it's not, am I going to college? It's where am I going to college?
Mm-hmm.
And then if I'm going to college now, I have this assumption from society that now I have to be something.
Right.
And then when I'm something, it's not what I thought it would be. I mean, that was me as an architect. I went to college for 5 years, got this really hard degree as an architect, graduated and hated it, and had a lot of like self-doubt, like, well, now what am I supposed to do? I can't go back to school and start that whole process over. And what I realized though was I found something I was passionate about most of the time, the real estate industry,
Sure.
and there are days that are really hard, and there are times and things in business that are extremely challenging. In fact, this has been one of the most challenging years of my career by far. And yet I keep going back to that thing that, like, hey, you know what? First of all, stay the course. And if you stay the course doing this for a period of time, you shouldn't have to work this hard forever.
Right.
And I think that's the problem is people's, level of tolerance for that.
Matt, these are huge takeaways and wise words from so many people that you've already mentioned already. I think this is a great segue into one of the crowd pleasers of this particular series. It's really looking at what the Titans are doing or have done to grow and scale their lives, scale their businesses. So if you could look back at your career thus far, Matt, and pick or choose one or two things that you might have added to your business that took it from one level to the next, what's that look like for you?
So, I know you interview a lot of like really successful real estate agents, and so I would assume some of the answers are like very specific on like, hey, it was this thing or whatever. For me, I can think of, when I was thinking about this, I can think of two things.
Okay.
The first are the people. My career trajectory took a hockey stick, slow but then extremely fast curve when I surrounded myself with people who wanted the best for me.
Love
And
it.
it wasn't all about them. And so the question that I think people need to be asking themselves are, am I surrounded with those kind of people? And the second thing is an analogy that I was shown, and I'm going to kind of draw it up here real quick.
Oh yeah, great.
Is Gary Keller talks about this idea that if this circle represents everything that you wanted, for example, if you were to come work in my organization, I should be at a level with you that I know everything that you want to get out of your life, and it exists in that circle, right? So that means that that my world then has to be infinitely bigger than that, or the vision for what I want to create together with you has to be infinitely bigger than what you want, because if it's not, then we have misalignment and we have tension. So if I wanted to go build a real estate team and I said, hey, you should come work with me. And I said, what are your income goals? He said, well, I really would like to make $150,000 next year selling real estate. And I go, cool. Well, I want to make only, $200,000 next year selling real estate, or that's all that I know how to do. That doesn't add up to, the amount of money we both need to make.
Right.
And so when people are considering opportunities, or if there's frustration or tension in their current environment or their current role, it's usually, I find, because there's too much of a similarity between what the vision of the organization is or the lid of the organization and what the talent has.
Interesting. I love that.
And it can also go the opposite way, though. If you have a really big vision and you hire really small talents, then they're never going to be able to even think or see the way that you see things going.
I see.
So
there's that happy medium inside there where it's not too big, it's not too small. I think it's just right for everybody who's involved in that organization. But is that a tricky thing for you to, as a producer, to find? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think yes, but it comes down to, I think you have to turn over a lot of rocks to find those people. But I think you have to get extremely clear with what you want first, be able to articulate that to somebody. And then you have to be able to be willing to take the time to take them through a valid interview process, which we have called the KPA, Keller Personality Assessment, Career Visioning. And it basically is sometimes painstakingly digs into somebody before you would get into a business with them, so that you know what they want, you've expressed what you want, and been able to identify if there's a match or not.
Wow.
That's the thing is, in business, whether it's running a real estate team or a coffee shop, people fall into, where'd you go find that person? Well, it's my sister's best friend. Oh, cool. Are they qualified for the position? Well, they're doing it. Okay. Is that the best person for that position, or just the person who was the best in the moment to make it easiest to hire for that position? Right. And most people aren't willing to do the work to find the right person for the position. And for me, I learned that, like I said, the first part of the question was by surrounding myself with people that thought bigger than I did. I have, in the businesses that I'm in, I surround myself with people who are wanting big lives, so that everything that I want, they know that I want. Sure. And they know why I want it, and they help me go get it, because what they want, it doesn't affect what they want. Sure. It only helps them get what they want, right?
Yeah, and I love that analogy and breakdown too, because when you're surrounding yourself with those core groups of people, it's contagious. You are guilty by association, positive or negative. But I think that those professionals who have, exuded a certain amount of success and they've gone through the process, they've hopefully been where you want to go already. And have learned through that process to help you go through that faster and better, hopefully, as they're growing themselves and you're growing together, which is how it should be, in my opinion. No one does it alone.
No, exactly. I was talking to somebody earlier this morning, and we were on a conference call, and he is in Gary Keller's Top 100 Mastermind. And with the top 100 teams or agents in the company out of 160 plus thousand agents across the country. Wow. Right. And so, and the question was asked, how many of the people in the top 100 are just powerful top rainmaker, and then, agents below? And he said, in my experience, everybody that I've interacted with, there may be a, Greg at the top, it's Greg's team, but for every single one of those, there is a CEO or a CFO type individual who is equally invested in the growth and ownership of that business, even if they don't even own the business on paper.
Wow.
Nobody succeeds alone, right? And so that's the thing. I mean, you want to be surrounding yourself with empire builders, because you have everybody has a natural lid of what they're able to do on their own. In anything. If I want to go run a marathon, there's only so much training I can ever do to run a marathon. I will, but if I wanted to go run it faster, I go get on a relay team, and we increase our time or decrease our time. Right. Sure. And so it's people, for the most part, though, get to that ceiling of achievement, and they're not willing to think any differently to break through it. They're like, well, I guess I'm just going to be this, I guess. I've sold 7 million in real estate for the last 7 years of my life. And that's just what it is, you know? And what I've found to be true too, is most of the people that I know that have built successful real estate businesses, like 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 million in volume, have done that actually really quick.
Wow.
Because they built it with the right foundation. I haven't experienced where it's like, yeah, I built a $85 million real estate business, and I've been in business for 35 years, and every single year I increased it by 4 million in volume. It's like I did 6 million on my own, and I was a good, successful individual agent. And then I just realized I don't want to work that hard. So I went out and hired somebody, and I screwed it up really bad. And then I learned, and I hired somebody better. And then we did 10 million. And then I was like, hey, maybe I can take this system and implement it and document it. And then I went and hired that person. And then next thing I know, 3 years later, I'm doing 50 million. And then the next year I'm doing 90 million, because it becomes a scalable business.
Love it.
And this to me, like I love selling real estate. I'm a managing broker in my Littleton office. I teach real estate contracts. I am a real estate agent by default.
Sure.
And I love it. But this is what I really love talking about more is business development and helping people think differently to go do whatever it is they want to do, you know?
Well, Matt, I mean, hopefully everybody can see and or hear the passion that's coming out of you. I mean, it's like lighting a fire and just letting you go. It's a beautiful thing to see. And obviously your thought process is to the highest of levels. And as you had mentioned, empire builder status, right? Yeah. I mean, you look at it in that direction, and anybody who's around you is in positive guilty by association. So I love that. And I can't thank you enough for just sharing the little bits of information that you already have amongst so much knowledge bases that's already out there for not just being a top producer, but really growing and scaling and treating it like a business. So, I mean, I can't thank you enough. And I know the audience is really enjoying this. So pause it, rewind it, take notes, reach out to Matt. I mean, I can't stress that enough. But Matt, I do want to shift gears into this particular series. And when it comes down to it, this is the tricky part of the interview. It's the challenge question. Yeah. So no stranger to challenges and struggles. I mean, as you know, the more successful you get, the more, failure is a part of that and attached to it. And it's okay. But I'm a firm believer that we all deal with challenges, whether it's in the past, now, or in the future. No one's exempt. But what really matters to me is what you take away from, what you learn, and what you can grow from through those tough times, whether they're personal or professional. So sure. Matt, if you're comfortable sharing a challenge personally, professionally, that you went through in your life, that you overcame, you came stronger because of it, what's that look like for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's something like, by the grace of God, I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, or even 3 years ago. Right. And I think, one of the things that like I said earlier, this has been one of the most challenging years of my career, because I just took on a lot of financial responsibility. And we're building out a new office building in Colorado Springs. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I have learned about myself throughout that process is I've learned a couple things. One, I've learned what my tolerance for risk is.
Wow. Okay.
And I think for a while this year, I was probably over that threshold. And I mean, I've never had anxiety in my entire life. I've never like literally I'm like always like optimistic to a fault. Sure. Not like stick my head in the sand, whatever, it's going to be okay. But like very just like, yeah, I bet on myself, whatever. But there was a series of point in time this year where I was like, if this doesn't all work out, like, I don't know what to do.
Wow.
And it may never even have been at that point, but just the way that I was analyzing it from what I was living in and sitting in, that's the way that it felt to me. Okay. And so I have really learned the power of just like being vulnerable in that. Because I'm also, I am a high I personality. If you're familiar with the DISC personality, I lead with influence to the point of, like, my desire to be liked by people is higher sometimes than my desire to succeed. And so therefore if I psychoanalyze myself, I will succeed at things that I don't even care about, just because I don't want to be seen as a failure, because I want you to like me at my core value. Right. And so what that also leads to, though, is you don't really open yourself up to most people, because you want to look like you always have it all together.
Sure.
And there was a point where about in April of this year, I went over to my mother and father-in-law's house, and I was just sitting there, and my mother-in-law handed me a glass of wine. This is like 5 o'clock, and I just had a horrible day dealing with some stuff. And I was just sitting there, and she's like, "Hey, how's it going?" I just started crying. Just like out of nowhere, because I had like finally for the first time realized, like, I actually can't do this all on my own. Sure. And not that my mother-in-law could solve that problem for me. Right. But it was just, I was like finally like aware of like the vulnerability. And I've learned through that I don't have to bear the weight of all of this on my own. and
Right.
nobody expects me to, and nobody cares. So it's like you're sitting there thinking you have to keep it all together all the time. You don't really. And I've also learned the power of perspective. My
Okay.
mentor, when I first got into business, I used to call him at like, I'd blow his phone up at like 10:15 at night. And I'd be like, hey, you know, how do I draft this inspection objection? And what about this? And, what about this, that? And he's like, he would always call me, like, Matt, you are not a brain surgeon.
Wow.
No one is going to die on your operating table tonight if you don't get this correct. It's just real estate, and it's just money. And if
Yeah.
you screw it up and you didn't actually try to screw somebody over and you made an honest mistake, that's why you have errors and omissions insurance.
There you go.
And if that doesn't cover it, guess what? We write a check.
Hmm.
And it's just money. And so I think that perspective has been huge for me, because I've really overcome a lot of challenges this year, and have kind of arrived at a place of like, you know what, I'm going to go do what I think is the right thing to do in every situation to the best of my ability. And then whatever happens, happens.
Wow.
And whatever people do to affect that negatively, I can't control that. All I can control is the way that I respond. And that's something that I think is key in leadership, that you have to understand the difference between reacting and responding.
Hmm.
Leaders respond, people react. And so if you come at me with something because that's just where you think you're in the right or whatever, and it affects me negatively, I get to choose to react to that, or I get to choose to take a step back and respond to that. And so that's been something that the challenge I've overcome this year. Is just a lot of really hard stuff, and had a lot of sort of like personal growth in that, I think,
Well, and you said it right there perfectly to me, is all of those things that you're talking about, and really pushing yourself and maxing out your comfort zone, and then past it, if you will, it's making you who you are, and it's bringing you up to another spot. And this won't be the last time, Matt,
Totally.
this, you're just going to keep pushing. There's a part of that nerves. And I think that if it's not making you think a little differently or squirm a little bit, then I don't think you're really pushing yourself to those highest of highs. And every entrepreneur, every top producer in any business feels that pain, feels that anxiety. And I think that it's just a part of learning to grow in the change, and understand that's just a part of it. And as you have, and as you'll continue to do, right? I mean,
yeah. And I think that's right. I think that you also, though, as you get older and you have more responsibilities, and you also you view risk differently. And if you don't, then you're just reckless, right? And so
correct.
that's what it was for me, was realizing at what point was I willing to say, this is a measurable, calculated risk I'm taking, and I feel like I know there's still risk, but I feel like I can guard against that, or I can insure against that, or I can over time work through it, versus just like I have no control of the outcome anymore at this point.
Right.
And that's
going at it. Yeah.
and that's the thing is you're also dealing with people, and we're all broken, fallen human beings trying to figure our life out, right, at different points and different ages. And so you add that element into the ingredients of, you have this whole thing you think you've worked out. Oh, but then I'm going to throw this person in there who's just going to blow the whole thing up. And that's the part that for me this year was more the issue, was the human beings that I was dealing with were negatively affecting the outcome of something I thought I had under control. Okay. And so I learned, so I learned a lot in that too, in the selection process of that. So. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, huge takeaways already. And again, Matt, thank you so much for sharing. It's not easy to share the inner thoughts or vulnerability. But I think that that's crucially important for everybody to know, that we all have that, and we all think this way. It's being reactive, proactive, or really looking at it from that standpoint, as you said, versus leadership and versus non. I think there's so many different ways that we can address our lives, but you just have to keep moving forward and keep pressing if you want to go get it. But I want to shift gears on a softer question, because we made it through the challenge part of this. So we made it through. But I do want to go into actually one of my favorites, which is the travel back in time question. So this one's based off of, if you're a science fiction fan or anything like that, we don't have time machines, but if you could go back in time at any time of your life, any age range, whether it was, 20 years ago, whether it was last year, or whether it was little Matt, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
This is like really off topic, but I mentioned I want to design and build golf courses.
Yeah.
And this is like nothing to do with real estate, but it really is a passion of mine. I was really good at golf growing up, but I was not phenomenal at golf. Like I was not a phenom,
Okay.
But I have a 5-year-old son now and a 2-year-old daughter. And
Love it.
if I could go back to when I was 17 and I was considering colleges, and when I was 18 and I was the captain of my high school golf team, I would have told myself, you know what? Don't believe that inner self-talk or what you believe to be true about how far you can go in this passion of yours. Just take the offer and go to that Division II school who's recruiting you've never heard of, and just see what happens. Because you only get one chance in your life to play a college sport.
Right.
And instead I said, you know what? I applied to Pepperdine University, amazing golf team. I applied to Colorado State University, who at the time had an amazing golf team. And I got into both colleges. I couldn't afford to go to Pepperdine. So I went to CSU and I said, you know what? I'm not good enough to do that. I don't, there's only, 150 golfers at any given time that are on the PGA Tour. You're not going to ever do that. So don't even bother. And I went to CSU, and that was kind of the end of pursuing golf. Wow. And I still love it, and I play golf all the time. But I kind of go back and I'm like, that's really the only thing in my life I regret, as far as like a choice that affected in a potential outcome of my life.
Wow.
And so, and then you start saying that and you say, well, if I didn't go to CSU, I wouldn't have met my wife, and I didn't meet my wife, I wouldn't have my kids. And so it's like everything happens maybe for a reason, whatever. Sure. But I do think that if I'm going to always be the father that tells my kids whatever it is they want to do. I don't care what it is that they're passionate about. Just go pursue that passion until you're not passionate about it anymore.
Right. I think that's to me is the big takeaway into it. And I love that question because it's reflection on to, ourselves and our past and whatnot. And yes, we can't go back and change that. And I agree with you. Everything happens for a reason, because the alignment of that decision led to where you're at today. So it's not necessarily changing it. However, your point to that is pursuing that. Because at the end of the day, when you're in your 80s, 90s plus, and you're thinking about your life, everybody that I've talked to that's in that situation or had conversations with individuals that way, they don't think about, I wish I did another transaction. I wish I did another deal. They're regretting the things that they didn't try. They're regretting the things that they didn't stick their neck out for, more so than the things that they did. So to me, whether that's a sport or anything along the lines of passion, but that has to do with business, right? Anything that you want to go, you got a shot, take it, because that shot isn't always going to be there. And I love that mentality. It's not just to be a rah, let's everybody be entrepreneurs and, quit your 9 to 5 and do all these things. But if you have that passion and it's there and you have an opportunity, man, you got to go for it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing I think you realize as you're older and you look back is like, unless you invent Facebook or whatever, like most people have an idea and they grind it out for a long time, and they have a lot. Not that Facebook didn't grind it out, but I mean, like, not everybody, very few people are going to hit a home run and invent the Amazon, right? And or whatever. So, but I was listening to a business radio station the other day driving into work, and the guy was interviewing the founder of GoRuck, which is like a military based or military inspired like workout training thing, where they basically do these runs and they carry the same amount of weight that I think like people in basic training do, I think is what the principle. And I think money gets donated to military families and stuff like that. But he invented this concept, and then he basically invented this, turned it into a clothing line, and then he turned it into a GoRuck culture, and he does $20 million a year in revenue.
Wow. On
this one concept that he had a passion about. And he could have just, is like, how many things have I thought of in my life where I'm like, man, that'd be really cool. And I was like, and not to say that every single one of those was going to be a $20 million idea.
No.
But the majority of us have a really good idea or something that we're passionate about that we would love to do. And we would never do it because we're just like, the odds are too high. Or we don't. For my case with golf, right. I didn't have enough knowledge and information to know what the reality was. I was basing it on my perception of, if I'm not going to be Tiger Woods, don't bother. But the majority of people on the PGA Tour have grinded it out through the minor tours and have made their way through not Arizona State University or Stanford University and played for a college you've never heard of, but made their way through and had just had the right coach at the right time who took their golf game to the next level to where they finally were able to be a professional golfer.
Wow.
And so, I think that's what it comes down to is having the right amount of knowledge when you're looking at doing something too, so that you're not just relying on, it's not going to happen for me.
I love that. Huge takeaways. I know there's so many people that are literally fired up about that thought process. They're going to look at their lives a little bit differently because you said that, Matt. And I love that advice, not just for young Matt, but everybody who's watching or listening, myself included. This is great. I do want to shift gears to this one. And this is actually another crowd pleaser for this particular series, because everybody wants to know what the Titans are doing or have done to feed their minds, right? So I always lead into it with books you're reading or have read, podcasts you're listening to, influencers or coaches on social media. Matt, how are you feeding your mind?
So one of the best books I've read lately is a book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. And it speaks to a lot of the stuff we've talked about today, with the idea that everybody has a certain level of grit, and Angela calls it the grit scale. And basically what it is it determines it takes your natural ability of something based on your time you're willing to do the task.
Wow.
So if you and I go out and let's say, hey, we wanted to go swim a mile, okay? And we wanted to be able to do that, let's say by the end of the year.
Okay.
And neither of us had swam since we were in junior high or whatever. For example. We both dive in the pool. Well, we at that moment already have different levels of ability. Mm-hmm. Maybe you were on swim team in junior high and I wasn't. So you already have techniques that I don't know. So we get in the pool, and on day 0, you're already 25, 30% more efficient and effective than I am. But my level of grit is higher than yours when it comes to swimming. And so by week 2, now you haven't gotten much better, although you've improved, but I've said, you know what, I'm willing to do this until I do it, gosh darn it. And so I stay on task. And by the end of the month, I end up beating you, even though your natural ability was better than mine.
All right.
So that affects a lot of things in your life, if you think about it. And so, and that also affects people's success or failure at things. Maybe you gave up on real estate 1 month too soon before you finally had that breakthrough. I mean, when we coach new agents, that's the biggest thing I think that new agents think about the real estate profession, is that there's something these top producers are doing that they're not telling me. Because if they think that if they can do it, I can do it. But they think that there's some secret sauce that they're not doing. And really what it is for the most part is that mega agent has been doing things consistently over time and has just had a higher level of grit or time on task to build up enough momentum so that there's a consistent wake created so that there's a business to build, right? And most people are like, and the other thing about that is they surround themselves with self-fulfilling people. They don't go hang, if I'm a brand new agent, best advice I can give to a brand new agent is go hang out with top producers.
Yeah, well said.
Because you think like they think, and then you do like they do. It starts with how you think first, not with do, right?
Right.
And so, but the problem is they go surround themselves with all the other brand new agents in the bullpen who aren't doing anything. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is the worst industry ever. And real estate's hard. And, Zillow's definitely going to take over the world. And why are we even bothering? And oh, by the way, I know Target's hiring. Oh, they are? Yeah, I could, and so it just becomes a self-fulfilling thing. And it's a mindset issue. Right. And so the book Grit speaks a lot into that. And then it helps you kind of think about, well, yeah. And honestly, some things, real estate just isn't right for everybody. So it's okay to self-evaluate yourself out of the industry as well. And that's why I think if you take the 10 people, the National Association of Realtors says that for every 10 people that get into real estate, after the second year, only one of them is left.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that of those 10, of the 9 that failed, right, probably 5 of them shouldn't even have been in the real estate industry in the first place.
That's fair.
It's just too easy to get your real estate license.
Right.
Right. And I think that these other 4 that didn't make it probably weren't in the right environment with the right mindset to be successful. And this person that was successful was going to be successful anyway.
Right. Sure.
It wouldn't have mattered what brokerage model or what brand you put them under or what challenge you put in front of them. They just were going to make it happen, and they did. And that person becomes the mega agent. And these 4 probably could have been if they just were in the right environment.
I love that. And going through the whole process of that one book that you mentioned and, going through, a few things popped into my mind, and hopefully everybody's resonating out there too. When you're talking about grit, I always look at it for work, right? Grit, work, putting the
Yeah.
time in, really going through. So there's the book that I really enjoy, Talent is Overrated. And when you're looking at it from that standpoint, hard work is going to beat talent 9 times out of 10, because you're
Absolutely.
just going to outwork your competitor, and you might have a natural advantage, but at the end of the day, you got to put the time in. So I'm a firm believer in what you just said there. And I know so many other people are. Something that popped into my head as you were talking about just when you gave up, you were just about to get there. There's that analogy of that visual where there's 2 prospectors, and they're essentially digging for diamonds or gold. And the visual is there's 2 guys, and one guy's chipping away at this side, and you can literally see there's just a mound of diamonds or gold here, and he's just about to get there. And the other guy on the left-hand side, he finds this little nugget or diamond. The guy drops it and goes over to the other guy and gives up. He was right there.
Yeah.
Mountain. So to me, that's so true with everything that you're saying. And so many people just give up in that process. But going back to your original comment is just surrounding yourself with people who think where you want to be, and emulate and learn from, and try to give as much as they're giving to you. I mean, everything you're saying, Matt, is true gold or diamonds, no pun intended, with everything that was going on. So didn't mean to interrupt you, but that to me just really stood out.
No, totally. And I mean, and everything that I've said has been things I've either experienced, but mostly things that I've learned, right? Because I've surrounded myself with those people. And so the next thing I would say is Gary Keller just launched a podcast about 5 months ago called Think Like a CEO.
Love it.
And he runs it with Jay Papasan. Jay Papasan kind of runs the podcast, and then Gary kind of just talks about leadership for the most part. And one of the things they just talked about on the last episode that I had listened to was that don't hire talent, engage talent. Managers hire, leaders engage. And I thought that was an interesting concept. And what he was saying was, I can either hire you, and what that means is you're going to be here from 9 to 5, and you're going to serve this role, and you're going to take this widget, you're going to screw it into that thing, and then at 5 o'clock you can go. And by the way, you can have lunch from 12 to 1, and you can, have your 2 weeks vacation, and I'm your manager and you're my employee, and there you go. Leaders say, hey, listen, here's an opportunity I have. Here's what the opportunity serves in the greater role of the vision for what we're trying to accomplish. What is it that you want out of this opportunity if we were to get in business together? What is it that you want out of life? What are you going to do with this income that I'm going to pay you? And then how can I then be so in tune with that, back to this analogy, so that I can help you accomplish that? How can I be so engaged in what you want in your life so that you can help me accomplish what we want as an organization? And so I thought that's the kind of stuff he talks about on that podcast. It's just always fascinating.
Love it. Very cool.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned, again, when you're talking about books and podcasts and things like that, I love the fact that you are obviously learning from different sources, whether it's physical books, Audible, or you're actually listening to it on podcasts. But to me, another takeaway for everybody out there, again, is constantly engaging with your peers and those top tier professionals and learning that way. So obviously being a man of your craft and doing what you do to the level you do it at, Matt, that goes without saying. I mean, you're constantly learning, constantly growing. But just so everybody knows out there, I'm going to have links in the comments down below, again, so you can follow along and feed your mind the same way that this man is, or hopefully a little bit. So Matt, I can't thank you enough. I mean, this has been full of amazing applicable takeaways for top producers from all over the industry. So hopefully everybody really, really enjoys this content. But I want to wrap everything up with a final question.
Yeah.
And this ends up being a quote or mantra that sums you up as a man, as a professional. What's that look like for Matt Leigh?
I definitely don't have some really well eloquent little like life mission statement, but I would like, at the end of my days, if someone looked back at my life, I would hope that it would be, authenticity and integrity. Because to me, authenticity doesn't speak to perfection. Authenticity speaks to, hey, he was what he was, but that is what he was. Like, you knew it, and yes, he screwed up and he was imperfect. But he did what was right in all situations to the best of the knowledge that he had at the time. Wow. And that's something that, like, when I speak to agents about being a part of our companies, or when I speak to our agents that are part of our companies, or when I get a phone call about some deal blowing up, we always have a conversation about integrity. And that's the problem with part of the reputation of this industry, I think, is that there's a lack of integrity or perceived integrity, I would say, not a lack of integrity in the industry, but from the outsider's perspective, they think real estate agents are, disingenuous,
right,
for the money. And that's not true. Every real estate agent, that's not been my experience. Real estate agents that I know are in it because they see the real estate industry as a path to provide for their families and lifestyle and whatever it is that they want to do.
right.
I think the problem is there's a lack of knowledge in this industry. And I think we focus on teaching people the wrong things. And so they make mistakes because they just didn't know what they didn't know.
Right.
They're not, and so when you make a mistake, be authentic and own it, and then and then have integrity to do what's right. And so I think that's really, when I think about wanting to be defined by something, it's authenticity and integrity.
Well, Matt, I would agree with that statement 100%. Authenticity and integrity you exude, my friend, and it speaks volumes, obviously, about your reputation. It's impeccable. And again, I'm just honored to have you and share your story with everybody out there. So, Matt, you are an official real estate titan, my friend. So thank you so much. Seriously. And everybody, thank you so much, as always, for your time and attention, your love and support. If you like what we're doing here at the Real Estate Titans, please don't forget to like our Facebook page, check out our Instagram account, YouTube as well. And if you are an audiophile and you like to listen to this content, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, live every Tuesday and Friday afternoon, a different Titan, a different location. We'll catch everybody on the next live episode of Real Estate Titans. Take care.
Thanks, man.